It's a brisk day as you walk across the moors, lost in thought and altogether too invested in your favourite podcast about the folklore of fair Albion, I mean, who can blame you, that you barely notice that you've strayed off course. And it's only as you notice the heavy fog settling that you realise you're completely lost. And not only that, but it's getting dark. Fortunately, in the near distance, you notice an old peel tower silhouetted against the twilight sky. You shiver and recall your grandmother warning you about being out on the moors in the gloaming, and knowing that there's no way you're going to be able to retrace your route through the fog, so you decide to take refuge in the tower overnight. The splintering door is locked, but you shoulder your way through. After a moment, your eyes become accustomed to the dark, and it takes a while, but eventually you get a fire lit. As the golden flames illuminate the walls of the old fort, you notice that you are not, in fact, alone. In the corner, a small man crouches. His wild grey hair pokes out from a wet red cap atop his head. The dark liquid drips into his brows, and his narrowed eyes are a similarly violent crimson hue. In his hands, he clutches a large rock, and with inhuman speed, belying his small stature, he lifts it high above his head and launches it towards you. In an instant, you dart to the side, just fast enough that the stone merely skims your ear as it crashes, cracking against the wall. In desperation, you recall an old embroidered Bible verse that once hung above your bed, and reading it in your mind, you yell out the passage, Deuteronomy 25:11-12, a classic. As soon as the verse passes your lips, the old creature lets out a hideous shriek. Flames begin to rise from his feet and spread up his little gnarled legs. In horror, you turn your face away. And once the screaming has stopped, you dare to turn back to the figure, but all that remains is a single charred tooth lying on the floor. Welcome, welcome, one and all, and let me tell you a tale of gods and goblins, a podcast exploring the bizarre and beautiful world of British mythology, folklore and fairy tales. We will share tales of fearsome giants, valiant heroes, witches and wizards, ghosts and ghouls, and fantastical flora and fauna. But in this, our very first series, we're taking a look at the fairies of the British Isles. But let's introduce ourselves. Hello! My name is Heather Morehouse, and I am your humble narrator, and I have with me Kieran Hill. What do you want me to say?
I don't know, I thought there was more in the script.
Oh, there's nothing written down. My co-creator of this podcast and my co-pilot in the journey of life.
Ahoy, Captain. I've got a microphone this time, and I will not be silenced.
Yes, that brings me to my second point. Thank you very much for the very lovely response that we had to our first episode. We had quite a considerable more. We had way more listeners than we anticipated, and we're super happy about it, and we had really lovely feedback that made us very happy in our little folkloric hearts. But we did hear you loud and clear, which is what we didn't hear from Kieran.
Censored me once.
Yes, hopefully the audio is better this time and you'll be able to hear me better and Kieran better. We're recording it a little bit differently. Kieran actually has a microphone now, so hopefully it's better. But yes, we're very much learning. We are new to this and we're hoping to improve where we can. We are an independent little very, very DIY podcast as it is. So, it's all a bit of a learning curve, but we're trying it out and we are very, very happy to have had such a nice response.
Speaking of learning, we should probably say right up top, this is going to be a two-parter, right?
Yes, so we got a little bit too excited about researching the theme for this next episode, and we officially wrote a longer script than either of our dissertations at university. And so we're splitting it into two. We're making it a two-parter, which is exciting. So it means that the second episode will actually be coming out in a week's time. But let's not wish our lives away. Let's talk about what we're talking about today, which is of course, fairies. In the last episode, we set out the etymology of the word fairy and the traits and activities of fairies, from flying on the backs of tiny white horses and grooming goats' beards, to blinding people that they catch snooping on them. We learned that fairies are pretty much always having fun, even if you're not. If you haven't yet listened to episode 1, I recommend going back and giving it a listen, because it gives you quite a good overview, I think. So far we've only really talked about fairies in general, the common fairy, but there are all sorts of fairies that inhabit the British Isles, and once again they are all wildly varied. Some are hideous, some are radiant, some are vicious, some kind, some small, and some are, less small. The murderous little man chasing you down in our opening story, well done for taking him down, by the way, that was really great work, bears little similarity to a member of the Tuatha de Danann, and yet they are all part of the same category of mythical folk. We'll be describing some of the different types of fairy in British folklore, their similarities and their differences depending on the region, and figuring out the differences between the words that we use as synonyms, such as elf, fairy, pixie, etc. It seems that it may have been when fairy lore began being incorporated into popular literature in the Elizabethan era that the terms for all the different types of fairies started being muddled. In A Study of Fairy Tales, published in 1916, Laura F. Creedy wrote that the term fairy was used in literature in the sense of a singular inhabitant of fairyland, as in a fairy, before the time of Chaucer, who died in 1400. She goes on to say that after the appearance of Spenser's Fairy Queen in 1590, distinctions became confused, and she says the name of the real fairies was transferred to the tiny little beings who made the green sour ringlets, whereof the ewe not bites.
Explain.
No, I can't. The ew's not biting that, that's all I know.
The sour green ringlets.
Maybe it's like curly fries. And then the change adopted by the poets gained currency amongst the people. Fairies were identified with nymphs and elves, and Shakespeare was the principal means of effecting this revolution, and in his Midsummer Night's Dream, first performed in 1595, he has incorporated most of the fairy lore known in England at this time, though I may add that at times he does this quite inaccurately. So attempts to logically divide folktales into strict categories is a challenging, if not kind of impossible task, particularly when the terminology has become changed and muddled over time by sneaky writers and different folk tellers of tales, with contradictions and variants cropping up constantly. But we've tried. Pretty much every single time that we put something into a category, we will then find a direct opposition to that. So, welcome to the contradictory, tangled web of this.
It's between that and the fact that every story has 5 different endings.
So, the fairies of the British Isles fall generally into a few different categories. Trooping and solitary fairies are the main two, although they are commonly divided further based on their habitats. In Wales, the Tylwyth Teg, their fair family or collective term for fairies in Wales, has been divided by folklorist Wirt Sykes.
Blessed be his name.
Glory, glory, Wirt Sykes. Into one, the Ecclellon, or elves. Oh, and I'm so sorry for my pronunciations. I know they're really bad. I'm trying, but they're gonna be pretty dodge. The Coblynau, or mine fairies. The boobachod, or household fairies, the Gwragedd Anon, or fairies of the lakes and streams, and the Gwyllion, or mountain fairies. Robert Hunt, in his Popular Romances of the West of England, divides the Cornish fairies into 5 similar classes. The small people, which are roughly elves, the Spriggans, who are malicious, the Piskies, or pigseys, the Buchas, or knockers, who are mining fairies, and the Brownies, who are household fairies. Although there are many more types of fairies beyond these ones, these are more or less the categories that we're dividing them into as well. And we're not going to try to attempt a full, exhaustive list of every single kind of fairy in the British Isles, because we would be here for many, many hours.
It took us longer than we'd like to admit to realise that as well.
We were trying to do an exhaustive list and realised that that was a fool's errand. We'll be covering some of the most common types of household or guardian fairies, as well as some of the more sociable trooping fairies. So, what's the difference between a pixie, a piskie, and a pigsey? A brownie and a boobach? And how do their definitions in contemporary usage and fiction differ from the older records?
Tell me.
I will! Let's start with some of the friendliest fairies, the domesticated category of fairies that lives amongst humans and helps them around the farm or home. Guardian fairies may have originated as domestic tutelary spirits, which are deities that act as protectors over a particular place, person, or occupation. The Lares of Roman tradition were often categorized as household gods that would observe, protect, and influence all that happened within the boundaries of their location or function. So domestic Lares would watch over important events in a household, such as births and weddings. Other forms of tutelary spirits would be familiars or animal guides that are, of course, most associated with witches. Indeed, household fairies are often shown to be very protective of their home and the humans within it. Sometimes they even move house with them, like pets, but that care.
There speaks a cat owner.
Oh yeah, true. Really gave up the ghost there. Let's talk about brownies.
Give me the brownie and give it hot.
Ooh.
Sounds like poop.
No, it sounds like brownies the food.
Oh, yeah.
This spirit was purely of the household. Kindly and good, he devoted his every care to the benefit of the family with whom he had taken up his abode. Brownies are no treat to look upon. They are small, shaggy-haired and ugly creatures wearing dirty old rags or entirely nude. Not me, I'm never nude. In Aberdeenshire, they are said to have no separate fingers or toes, while in the Scottish lowlands, they have a hole instead of a nose. I wonder if, you can see the sinuses, or it's just,
Straight through.
It's more of a bullet wound. That said, they do have jolly smiles and good-natured personalities, so that kind of makes up for it.
I don't care about a nose in a man. I care about a personality.
Yeah, they have great senses of humour. They are easily offended, though, and will flee if mistreated or insulted. Brownies are known for their slavish devotion to their human companions, going above and beyond the standard fairy fare of helping around the house and threshing the wheat. This is demonstrated in this account in George Douglas's Scottish Fairy and Folk Tales. It tells of a brownie who lived with a notable border family, now long departed. The matriarch of the family had unexpectedly gone into labour, and their servant, who had been tasked with riding out to fetch the midwife, seemed in no keen hurry to do so. Seeing the lazy rider, the brownie took it upon himself to help the lady of the house. And pulling on the servant's greatcoat, the brownie grabbed the fastest horse in the stable to fetch the midwife. When the brownie was returning, with midwife in tow, it became clear that the River Tweed had risen to the point where crossing had become dangerous. This did not deter the brownie, who simply dove in, carrying both the terrified woman and the horse above his head, and upon arrival placed the midwife at the side of his lady. The horse was found later by the stable boy, safely back in his stable, but in a woeful plight. Poor horse! Having done his duty, the brownie returned to the room of the boy who was meant to be making the journey, and found that he was only just now beginning to put on his boots in preparation for the ride. Upon seeing this, the brownie beat the boy mercilessly with his own horsewhip. News of the brownie's work reached the lord, who felt that it was only right to reward such selfless behaviour, and so he commissioned a green coat to be made.
When you say selfless behaviour, is this getting the midwife or beating the servant boy?
He was just really glad to not have to lift his own finger when beating servant boys, and glad to have his horse all mangled, I guess.
You hear the phrase, don't spare the horses. I don't know if that's quite what they meant.
Do you hear that phrase?
Yes.
Don't spare the horses.
Yes, that's the phrase.
Can you define it for me, please?
He's going faster.
Oh, yeah, that's what he did.
Yeah.
That's about this brownie.
He didn't spare the horses.
He did not spare the horses, or the stable boy.
I feel the stable boy should have been spared.
To be fair, the midwife was probably also pretty rattled. She had just been carried by a tiny naked old man across the River Tweed. The brownie gladly accepted the coat, and taking it as a sign that his tenure with the family was at an end, he took away to spend the rest of his days living within the land of the fairies, on the fairy Costa del Sol. According to William Henderson's Notes on the Folklore of the Northern Counties of England and the Borders, snappy, it is believed in Berwickshire that the brownie was the ordained helper of mankind in the drudgery entailed by sin, and that is why he is unable to take payment for the good that he does around the house. Indeed, a brownie has been known to depart if his work is even acknowledged verbally. He is, however, allowed some little treats. Most often he will be granted a bowl of milk or cream, or a knuckled cake, a type of oat cake, kneaded using one's knuckles rather than a rolling pin.
I'll feed you a knuckled cake sounds very threatening.
Yeah, a bit like a knuckle sandwich.
Yeah.
But sweeter.
You'll follow it up with a kiss. These treats are to be placed around the house where he might find them, rather than being presented to him directly. Should one, for whatever reason, wish to rid themselves of their live-in helper, that only requires a bit of milk and a cake from time to time, then all one has to do is lay out some clothing. Whereas the brownie in that last story was delighted by his new coat, most take great offence to being offered clothing. However, they will take their new clothes and then leave, often singing some variant of this little refrain: "A new mantle and a new hood, poor brownie, you'll never do more good." In Glen Devon, the story goes that one night a man put out some clothing for a brownie, only to hear in a highly offended tone, "Give brownie coat, give brownie sark, you'll get no more of brownie's walk."
Apparently brownies were not the rhymesmiths they thought they were.
It rhymes in Scottish, but I am being kind and not doing my A++ Scottish accent for everyone.
That'll be in a bonus episode. Heather Morehouse does the dialects of Britain.
I'll give it a go. Henderson shares another account from one Mrs. M. The M is for mystery. It is curious what dislike brownies have to clothing. There was one in the old Peel house where I was born. The servants, out of gratitude for his assistance, gave him what they deemed an indispensable portion of man's attire. Unfortunately, however, it was part of a suit of livery, and he vanished crying, "Red breeks and a ruffled sark, you'll no get me to do your work."
So, do brownies only talk in rhyme? Is it only worth noting down when they speak in rhyme?
Why would anyone write down anything unless it rhymes? One notable brownie is the Cold Lad of Hilton, although we do have to preface it by saying that he's sometimes a brownie, or he's sometimes the ghost of a murdered stable boy, or sometimes kind of both.
Yeah, is there a substantial difference? Can all brownies be ghosts?
Well, there are some tales that suggest that fairies are ghosts, basically. I think we'll probably expand on that later if you'd like to stay tuned in 2 episodes' time.
Will we ever do ghosts?
Obviously we'll do ghosts. There's like millions of ghosts. There's tons of silly hauntings in Britain. Maybe we'll even go and find someone we can explore the world.
Absolutely can we.
Let's go ghost hunting.
Hell yeah.
In Hastings. Hastings, though, loads of ghosts. Smugglers' ghosts.
Really?
The Cold Lad used to inhabit Hilton Castle in Tyne and Wear, where he was particularly fond of messing around with the kitchen staff. Should they leave the kitchen neat, he would create an awful mess for them to deal with in the morning. Conversely, if they left the kitchen a mess, they would come in the morning to find it immaculate, which isn't really that much of a trickster move. That's just him being...
Be helpful.
That's being nice.
Why wouldn't you just leave it messy?
Exactly. Leave it messy every night. He comes in, sorts it out.
Job's a good one.
That's cheap labour.
Yeah.
Regardless, the kitchen workers had decided that they were quite done with his antics, and one night left out a green cloak and hood by the kitchen fire. At midnight, the Cold Lad swooped in and put them on, and it's at this point that our story diverges. According to one version of the story, he gladly disappeared, singing, "Here's a cloak and there's a hood, the Cold Lad of Hilton will do no more good." In the other, he got so excited that he danced around until the light of dawn. But when the first cock crowed, he disappeared sadly, singing that same song.
That's quite tragic.
I know! Did he go to heaven?
Yes.
Yes, that's absolutely
Because he was such a good ghost.
Yes.
I think he went to hell.
He went to hell.
I don't know, to the fairy realm. Maybe he didn't like his parents or something.
Didn't want to see them again.
Yeah.
While many things that offend or upset a brownie might seem innocuous to you or I, there are other things to avoid should you want to keep your brownie friend. Courtesy of The Popular Rhymes of Berwickshire by good old George Henderson, one of our faves in this household at this point.
We do love Mr. Henderson.
We stan George Henderson. Cranshaw's in Berwickshire was once the abode of an industrious brownie, who both saved the corn and threshed it for several seasons. After one harvest, some person thoughtlessly remarked that the corn was not well mowed or piled up in the barn. The sprite quite reasonably took offence to this, and the next night threw the whole of the corn over the Raven Crag, a precipice about 2 miles off, muttering, "It's not well mowed, it's not well mowed, then it'll never be mowed by me again. I'll scatter it over the Raven Stane, and then they'll have some work when it's mowed again."
Which part of that was reasonable?
He was angry.
So?
Nobody likes criticism.
You just destroy people's crops for a year?
He was doing a really good job at threshing, and then this guy
no
was...
proof of that.
There's a chance he might have been doing a bad job, but he was probably doing it very hard. He believed in what he was doing.
That's still no reason to destroy someone's property.
Tory up in here.
You call me a Tory because I don't agree with you.
I think I can. Anyway, I'm on the side of the brownie in this because that guy was very judgmental about the work he was doing. He was doing his best.
But if he did a bad job, then he should be told he did a bad job.
No. He should be given 5 stars on iTunes. Okay. Let's move on to the Mullis.
My favourite.
Who is related but distinct from the brownie. The Mullis is even uglier than a brownie, who aren't exactly lookers themselves. The Mullis lives in the Killegee, the place before the fireplace in the kiln, and is most notable for having no mouth. Instead, ingesting his food by inhaling it through his monstrously large nose that covers its entire face. According to this rhyme, the Mullis has a particular fondness for pork. Old Mullis wanting the mow, which means that he is without a mouth or wanting of a mouth. Come to me now, where were ye yesterday, when I killed the sow? Had ye come, ye'd have gotten your belly full. Mullis are known to live in mills and will play tricks on the miller, such as throwing hot ash and embers at them unless the miller calls out, "Old Mullis wanting the mow, come to me now." The Mullis, in another turn of absolute uselessness, will very rarely leave his preferred corner of the mill, except to thresh, but only in an emergency. That was quite specific in the source text. Should any misfortune befall the miller, though, or his mill, then the Mullis will assist by wailing piteously.
I relate.
So he hides in the corner, throws ashes at his landlord, and then just cries if something bad happens to the miller, which he's probably done by burning him horribly. What does he wail out of? The nostrils.
The nostril.
Every mill would have its own Mullis haunting its corners, so there are many tales of them. In Roxburghshire, the Mullis is part of a spell known as the Blue Clue, a divination practised on Halloween and at other times. You must throw a clue, a ball of thread, which came to mean a hint due to the ball of thread being used to draw someone out of a labyrinth. Dictionary corner. So you throw this clue into a pot, alone, in the gloaming, and wind the worsted, the woolen thread, onto a new ball. Towards the end of the winding, the Mullis will hold the thread, and you must ask, "What holds?" And he will snort out the name of your future spouse.
Like a piece of paper.
I think he sort of toots it. Another type of brownie from the Isle of Man is the Finitary, which means hairy stockings. He is a large hairy creature, often referred to simply as the hairy one, and also has the nickname of the nimble mower, owing to their prowess in grass cutting, a skill that they take particular pride in. There is a story that goes as follows. The Finitary had been cutting grass for a farmer, but, much like the story of the brownie at Cranshaw's, the farmer complained that he had done a shoddy job of it, which would have been a nice ending, but it gets quite a bit worse after this. The following year, the farmer was cutting his grass to his exacting standards, when suddenly sharp roots began shooting up from the ground. The first narrowly missed the farmer, but cut straight through his trouser leg. The farmer yelped, threw down his scythe, and took off at a hem of a rate. But as he got close to the gate, another root shot forth, and this time the old man wasn't so lucky. The piercing root sliced his leg. Nearly severed, the leg gave out on him, and as he lay there screaming for help, he remembered the cruel words that he'd said to the hairy one who had helped him the year prior. "It appears the mowing farmer got mowed by the nimble mower."
You're really proud of that, aren't you?
Yes. So, friendly fairy in this context is a fairly loose term. He's pretty harsh. But much like his mainland kin, the Finitary has a distaste towards clothing, which is slightly more understandable given that our grass-mowing friend is covered head to toe in thick, dark hair. Hairy stockings. He's so hairy. It'd be itchy.
Yes, it would.
Oh, it'd itch so bad.
Like when you wear socks.
Like when you wear socks.
Yeah. If you've got hairy feet.
Oh, you got hobbit feet.
I do kind of have hobbit feet.
The Hobgoblin is another helpful household fairy similar to a brownie. In England, a hobgoblin referred to a goblin of the hob or the hearth. As always, they are mischievous, but the Puritans began using the word to refer to any malicious or devilish entities, so the jolly hobgoblin transformed into a vicious figure. Even their appearance changed into something hideously frightening, and seeing one became an omen of death. So that's hobgoblins, but there's also hobs, another variant on our household fairies, but this is a specific term to northern England and the borderlands with Scotland. Hobs do not necessarily live in people's homes, but inhabit the rural areas of the country, often helping farmers with their work in the fields or women with their household chores. As with other forms of brownie, they will depart if given a coat, although hobs can be more troublesome than their more subservient brownies, so giving them a coat to make them leave can actually be quite useful. There is a particular hob, however, that can cure what ails you. Let us turn our sights to a natural cavern formed by the tides near Runswick Bay in Yorkshire, known as the Hob Hole, so called because it was the home of a hob. It was the hob's hole. Hob Hole was the hole of the hob. Yeah, you like that? I think that's my best work. People in Yorkshire believed that hobs could cure whooping cough.
By beating them with a riding crop.
And so, parents would bring their sick children to the cave and say, in a low voice, "Hob, hole, hob, my bairn's got to kinked cough. Tacked off, tacked off."
Tacked off.
Take it off. Dobbs, or Master Dobbs, is the Sussex term for a house fairy or brownie that helps with tasks in the home. If someone had been working harder than expected, it was often said of them that Master Dobbs has been helping you. I think it's also pretty fair to say that this is where old J.K. Rowling got the name of Dobby, the house elf, from in Harry Potter, particularly given the fact that he is given clothing. Puck, or Pook, is generally a mischievous domestic or nature fairy, similar to a hobgoblin. There are actually lots of place names in Sussex called Pook something or other. There's like Pook Hill.
Are there?
Pooksbury, or whatever. Huh. Yeah. Oh, that's cute.
Did not know that.
Yeah. In Old and Middle English, Puck would mean a demon or malicious spirit, but by the Elizabethan era, Puck was known as a prankster fairy, and was made famous as the shrewd and knavish sprite and servant of Oberon, the fairy king, in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. Puck's tricks would include shape-shifting, spoiling milk, frightening young girls, and tripping up old ladies. The name Puck was at times used to refer to the whole race of English fairies. Robin Goodfellow is a specifically named household fairy that, of course, will complete household tasks in exchange for a saucer of cream. Robin Goodfellow is synonymous with Puck due to their shared penchant for mischief. It was proposed by Sir Sidney Lee in an entry in the Dictionary of National Biography that it may have been the case that the names of Robin Goodfellow and a German forest elf named Hudekin, or Little Hat, had been amalgamated to create one Robin Hood. Oh, we shall perhaps dive into the veracity of that claim in the future. Maybe, I don't know. Does that mean that Robin Hood is a fairy?
No.
No.
Because that's two fairies put together.
If
That's it.
Do two fairies make a human? Many a mickle makes a muckle.
Robin Hood and his surrounding mythology, quite interesting in the wider spectrum of British folklore. He's one of the few series sagas, if you will, that has absolutely no magic in it.
Well, he's a fairy.
He's not a goddamn fairy.
Well, you just told me he's a fairy.
No, I didn't. He's a communist, not a fairy.
In Robin Goodfellow, his mad pranks and merry jests, a jest book published in 1628, which boasts to be full of honest mirth and is a fit medicine for melancholy, Goodfellow is depicted as very unlike most fairies. In the frontispiece, Goodfellow is a fawn-like figure with goatee horns, a goatee beard, and goatee legs, much closer to Pan, the Greek god of the wood. Bucha and pooka are Welsh brownies, and the word from which the English puck likely derived. These fairies are known to act like poltergeists when displeased, and will pound the walls, pinch people in their sleep, and throw objects around if mistreated. Though their tricks do not stop there, pookas are shapeshifters, and will use these powers to transform into various animals in order to horse around with humans. Hob holes hob, hob hob hob, hob hob hole.
He's on fire today.
I'm burning up. Somebody get the fire extinguisher.
Very warm.
I'm on fire right now.
You are sweating.
Let's return to A Midsummer Night's Dream again, and here is a quote from Puck. Sometimes a horse I'll be, sometimes a hound, a hog, a headless bear, sometimes a fire, and a neigh and bark and grunt and roar and burn, like horse, hound, hog, bear, fire, at every turn. Exit, pursued by a headless bear. A pooka's true form, however, is a gross little goblin-like creature. So those are Welsh bukas and pookas, but now let's talk about the Bucha from Cornwall, which is a type of fairy that was treated with great respect. Although there are two different types of bukas. The benevolent white Gwydden Bucha, like the Welsh Bucha, but perhaps even more venerated, and the malevolent Buchadoo. Are you laughing at the word Buchadoo?
Yes.
The Gwydden Bucha would bring good fortune and keep bad luck away if appeased. So, at harvest time, farmers and workers on the land would throw a piece of bread over their left shoulders for the Bucha. And when they drank some ale, a little was spilled on the ground for him. They were pouring one out for all the homies. When fishermen returned with their catch, a few fish would be laid out on the shore as a gift to the Bucha. If children were disobedient, it was not uncommon for them to be threatened with the evil Bucha, the Buchadoo, or Buchaboo, who would steal them away if they didn't do what they were told. Buchaboo, or Bugaboo, or Bugbear, comes into the folklore as general bogeyman figures. When the word entered English in the 16th century, it referred to any kind of creature made up to frighten someone, generally a child. In 1592, Thomas Nash wrote of mere bugbears to scare the boys. The word combines bug, an old word for goblin, from the Slavonic bog, with bear, suggesting that the creatures were goblin-bear hybrids. Ah!
That sounds adorable.
I know! The source of dread or annoyance sense came not long after. As we know, it is most used these days for a term of nuisance or a pet peeve, a bugbear.
And an enemy in D&D.
But yes, it is also a monster in D&D. I remember a point when we were coming up with the name for this podcast that we were trying to think, yeah, let's call it Of Dragons and Dungeons.
Which one of us suggested that?
I don't know. I think we both did at various points. The boobach sounds like it could be in the same category as a Buchadoo or bugbear, but is a different beast. The boobach is a good-natured Welsh house fairy, but its mischief is focused mostly on party poopers. The boobach that lived in one estate in Cardiganshire particularly enjoyed the company of people who would sit around the hearth drinking beer and smoking their pipes. So, when a Baptist preacher who was much more keen on prayers than ale came to visit the house, the boobach set to playing tricks on him. One night, it jerked the stool from under the good man's elbows as he knelt pouring forth prayer, so that he fell down flat on his face.
Ha.
Another time, it interrupted the devotions by jangling the fire irons in the hearth, causing the dogs to howl during prayers. He also frightened the farm boy by grinning at him through the window. The minister described one encounter that happened as he was crossing a field, as follows. I was reading busily in my hymn book as I walked on, when a sudden fear came over me and my legs began to tremble. A shadow crept upon me from behind, and when I turned around, it was myself. A person, my dress, and even my hymn book. I looked in its face a moment, and then fell insensible to the ground. In the end, the minister decided it was all too much, and rode away on his horse the next day.
To be honest with you, I kind of like this guy.
He sounds like a bit of a lad.
Yeah.
There is a tradition that if a maid takes the following course of action, the boobach will reward her. First, she has to sweep the kitchen, then last thing at night, light a good fire and leave the churn filled with cream on the hearth, plus an extra basin of fresh cream on the hob. Then she'll wake to find that the boobach has eaten up the cream in the basin and has churned the cream on the hearth so well that she only needs to give it a bash for it all to come together in one big lump of butter. So, those are some of the household fairies. There are many more names and variants on household fairies besides these, but we should probably keep some aside to talk about in the future. For now, let's tiptoe towards a couple of different but connected categories of fairy, the pixies and elves. Eclithlon are the small Welsh fairies that inhabit groves and valleys, similar to English elves. Welsh farmers on their way home from market will look in hollows or dingles for Eclithlon, but they are very rarely spotted unless they present themselves. They eat fairy butter and fairy victuals.
What's a victual?
Food. Specifically the toadstool, or poisonous mushroom. In fact, they're quite keen on poison because they also wear the bells of foxgloves or digitalis as gloves. You know what they say about small hands?
You're able to wear foxgloves?
Yeah, I think that's what they say, yeah. A certain Rowley Pugh lived on a farm in Glamorganshire and had an encounter with an eclich that behaved rather like a brownie, to be honest. Anyway, so Rowley was considered to have just about the worst luck in the county. His crops failed where others blossomed, his walls were damp while others were dry, and worst of all, his wife was weak and frail, and she could barely work. Useless! So bad was his luck that he figured he couldn't do any worse than by just packing everything he owned and moving to another country entirely. As he sat on his wall, surveying his blighted land, a voice asked him what the matter was. He turned and found to his utter amazement an eclich looking at him. Before Rowley could speak, the eclich said, with a grin, There, hold your tongue. I know more about you than you ever dreamed of knowing. You're in trouble, and you're going away, but you may stay now I've spoken to you. Only bid your good wife leave the candle burning when she goes to bed, and say no more about it. And with that, the eclich turned on his heel and ran off, just straight off, scarpered. So obviously, Rowley took heed of the small man's advice, and every night Catty, she being his wife, set out a candle, swept the hearth, and went to bed. And every night the eclich would come and do her baking, brewing, washing, and mending. And so, as a result, Rowley always had clean linen, fresh bread, and good beer. Rowley began feeling like his luck was changing and began once again working in earnest. And it came to pass that everything began to prosper from plant to pig. Things were fantastic for 3 wonderful years until one night Catty decided she absolutely had to see what was happening at night. Women, am I right? That night she snuck out of bed and through a crack in the door espied a group of eclithlon working away, dancing and laughing madly as they did so. So amused was she that Catty couldn't help but laugh, and at the sound of her voice the fairies vanished into thin air, never to be seen again. However, Rowley was now a wealthy man, and so misfortune never plagued him again. The moral of this story is let other people do your hard work, and money can buy you happiness.
In many ways, he was the first CEO.
He's a real boss, babe.
#girlboss.
Next up, elves. In Old English, which is a Germanic language, elf was the general term for fairy. Until after the Norman conquest, when the French language entered Britain, fae or fairy became the common term. It's coming up again! Shakespeare used elf and fairy interchangeably in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and it has been noticed that elf remained in place more in literary English, potentially sounding more sort of ancient and elegant than fairy. In Old Nordic belief, from which elves probably come, they are closer to gods. The root word alfra, meaning white one, was also used as a term for the fertility goddess Freya. Wirt Sykes, whoop whoop, good old Wirt Sykes, who really loves Wales, so admittedly might be a little bit biased, suggests that the English name was probably derived from the Welsh el, meaning a spirit, an elf, an element, noting that similar words in Welsh mean flowing, gliding, angelic, though also devilish. By England in the 13th century, elves were starting to diminish from their angelic forms and became closer to the general nature spirits that British and Nordic people believed to inhabit the landscape. Elves were certainly seen as somewhat positive, otherwise the prefix elf wouldn't have been used in people's names, for example, Elfrid or Elfwin, that were popular names at the time.
Guys, Elfwin's not so
That's quite a good one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Though they were also associated with sickness, elf shot and water elf sickness, featuring in Anglo-Saxon medical textbooks. And these could affect both humans and livestock.
Do we know what water elf sickness was?
Oh, maybe shall I Google it?
I would not. You're going to anyway.
It involves pale and ill-looking nails and watery eyes.
It's not just being English.
Prayers, charms and psalms were used to guard against elves, treating them more as evil spirits or demons in a mixture of religious and folkloric belief here. Now, pixies are often designated as part of the trooping fairies. We will elaborate further on the trooping and solitary fairies next episode, but also often take on the roles of domestic or guardian fairies, like brownies, making things rather confusing for us. Pixies, however, are more partial to playing tricks on the humans they live with. Pixies delight in rapping on walls, blowing out candles, playing in water, and pinching people in their sleep. And these tricks would particularly be focused on the lazy members of the household. Much like the brownie, there are tales of pixies being driven away by the offering of clothing, and one instance has a pixie being offered a suit only to vanish, exclaiming the classic phrase, "Pixie fine, pixie gay, pixie now will run away." That's actually a lot snappier than most of the ones about brownies.
Yeah.
You can see why pixies got more popular in the vernacular. Indeed, merely even acknowledging work done by a pixie is cause for them to disappear. Take this story out of Washington in Sussex. Eagle-eared listeners may notice some similarities to a story from our previous episode. It goes as follows. The farm owner knew this for sure. The pile of threshed wheat was larger that morning than it had been when he left it in the evening prior. This wasn't the first time either. So, being a man blessed with an inquiring mind, he decided to sit up and discover exactly what had been happening. Peeking through a gap in the door around midnight, our farmer discovered, much to his shock, 2 pixies working away with their fairy flails, only stopping now and then to say, "See how I sweat! See how I sweat!" Sussex fairies, they're always sweating. The farmer, to his delight and amazement, exclaimed, "Well done, my little men!" But alas, upon being discovered, the 2 let out a deafening yell and vanished, never to return to the barn again.
I like this farmer more than the previous one.
Yeah, this guy is much nicer than trying to shout at people for doing...
Your work for
Yeah, horrendous. As far as looks, pixies are small fairies with pointed ears and dressed in green, often wearing little distinctive caps, so are pretty close to the common modern portrayal of a pixie, really.
Fully Tinkerbelled.
Pixies are distinct from piskies or pigseys with a G, who originate from Cornwall and are much more malicious than pixies, often focusing their mischief on travellers. Piskies use their power of glamour to force humans to dance with them, causing them to lose their grip on mortal time.
That sounds horrifying.
Men returning from the inn after an evening of beer drinking would often get led away from their usual path by piskies. Or were they just pissed? I don't know.
I was about to say that the Piskies, am I right?
Yeah, hey, getting pisky.
Hey. I wish I could go to a pub.
I miss pubs. The piskies would appear like the light from a cottage window or as a man carrying a lantern, and the men would find themselves lost on the moors or bogs, although the kinder piskies would lead the travellers back to the path once they were done having their fun. This is the reason for the Cornish phrase, pisky-led, referring to someone who is lost or confused. The piskies' tricks were so common that only the cleverest men were generally chosen to travel at night, needing to use particular methods or charms to keep the piskies away. The most common way to escape their enchantment is to wear your coat inside out when going between villages at night. Although there is a suggestion that this was actually to keep the morning dew from ruining the outside of the coat's cloth.
I'm going to be honest with you, that just sounds like once again the guy's drunk. Why have you got your coat on inside out?
Yeah.
Have you been drinking again? No.
No. I had a run-in with some piskies and,
I'm going to bed.
goodbye. They are great plagues also to the farmers, often riding their colts or chasing their cows. But they must have been having a great time, since to laugh like a piskie was once a popular phrase. Joan the Wad, or Joan of the Torch, is the queen of the Piskies, and she originates from Pol Perro and would bestow good fortune on mortals who carried a small charm bearing her image. One young boy from St. Allan, near Truro, is said to have had an encounter with the Piskies. He had gone to the edge of a wood to pick wild flowers, like loads of young boys do, right? He was probably stamping on hedgehogs.
Misandry.
No. Anyway, he was probably prodding dead stoats or something, and never appeared back that evening for dinner. His mother mounted a search party, and on the third day of searching, they found the boy sleeping soundly at the edge of the wood, right where she had last seen him, without a scratch on him, and looking utterly peaceful. When he woke up, he had no idea that days had passed. He recalled that he had heard a bird singing so beautifully that he followed it right to the centre of the wood. As it got dark, he admired the stars shining brightly until he realised they were in fact piskies. They took him into a beautiful cave in which there were sparkling columns of crystal, and here he was fed on honey as an honoured guest. Finally, the Piskies sang a song that sent him into a sleep so deep that he knew nothing more until he was woken up close to his home. A wonderful adventure.
Pulling up on one thing quickly. Prodding dead stoats.
Yeah.
That's what you think country people do.
I think that's what little boys do.
You have no idea. No idea about the life of a little boy in the country. It's cricket.
Did you have to do Morris dancing?
We did actually have to do Morris dancing, yes. and not pole dancing. We had to dance with a maypole. But yes, it was mostly...
And who got burned in the Wicker Man?
Only an outsider. We never knew their names.
It's best not to know. The piskie or pixie of East Devon and Somerset is a different creature again from his sibling in Cornwall. Our young lad from Truro must have run into some friendly Devonshire fairies. Because where the Cornish piskie is generally highly unsociable, this piskie is, according to Robert Hunt in his Popular Romances of the West of England, a very harmless creation who appears to live a rollicking life amidst the luxuriant scenes of those beautiful counties. Hunt goes on to share a report from a friend of his in the literary world of a Devonshire group of fairies. It was a breezy summer afternoon, and these beautiful little creatures were floating on the circling zephyrs up the side of a sunlit hill, and fantastically playing where the oxlips and the nodding violet grow. So that is where we are going to leave you for the moment for this particular episode of Gods and Goblins. And in the next episode, we'll be talking about the trooping fairies and the solitary fairies and a couple of others as well.
Including the wonderful little man that we met up top.
Yes, the little creature that was the star of our first story there. So hold on to your red hats for that.
Oh.
Ooh. And as a treat, we are going to be releasing the next episode of this next week, not in 2 weeks' time at all, because it's sort of 2 parts and all. We thought we'd give it to you a little bit sooner. So, once again, thank you very much to everyone who was so kind about our first episode.
Yes, seriously, thank you so much. The response has been genuinely quite overwhelming.
Yes. You never know when you're trying something new how it's going to go down, and everyone was very nice. So, yes, we're very excited to share more of this. It's such fun researching it that in fact we researched it way too much. If you would like to keep in touch with us in between now and the next episode, we are on all of the social media at Gods and Goblins, or you can send us an email at godgobpod@gmail.com, godgobpod@gmail.com. And we would be delighted to hear from you if you have any particular requests for future episodes, if you have anything you'd like to feed back to us.
Praise, lavish us with praise.
Please lavish us with praise. That would be very nice.
Or products you want to give us. For example, Dungeons and Dragons books.
Yeah, I mean, we could just buy those.
Hey wizards, it's your boy. Cut all of that.
Yeah, that was terrible. What else is there to say?
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Big thank you for listening.
Yes.
Listen again. Maybe. If you like us. We like you.
We're available on all of the podcast things now. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on the Stitcher, we're on YouTube. We're on YouTube, we're on SoundCloud. We're everywhere. We're all around you.
We're watching.
In the corners. Listening. Waiting.
Like a Mullis.
We're in the corners like a Mullis. Sniffily snorting out some good podcast knowledge for you. Okay, take care. We hope you're having a wonderful week, and we'll see you next Tuesday for more Gods and Goblins. Bye-bye. That's goodbye from me, Heather Morehouse.
And a piteous wail from me, Kieran Hill.
Oh, my throat's gone away.
You're allergic to tea now.
Shut the fuck up. That's not funny.
Don't you joke about that.
That's not funny! I was in a terrible mood all day today because I had no milk to have tea with, and now I have tea, and it turns out I wasn't depressed. I just really wanted some hot leaf water. Oh god, I've somehow exited and ended up in my garden planner. It's a terrible mistake.
A This Innocuous Brownie suggested you plant carrots in the month of June. And that's actually he's an idiot.